Welcome to the Christopher Peter Review, your source for an economic perspective on salient current events impacting our public policy, our economic outcomes, and our overall society. Welcome. Persistence pays off at times. The smartest person or the hardest worker may not always be the one that succeeds. Sometimes the people who simply will not accept no for answer but will use rejection to spur better approaches will win out in the end, as they exhaust every angle and opportunity. David Ellison and his Paramount Skydance company has been very persistent lately in the market, acquiring companies to grow the Paramount brand back to its glory days, successfully brought Viacom-CBS into the fold. And now he can say he added Warner, who reversed course to accept their offer, as Netflix refused to increase their bid. Netflix will reportedly still receive their buyout fee, paid by Paramount Skydance, but Paramount Skydance will get the entire Warner business, not just the HBO Max streaming service. This will help bolster them in both the studio production market and the broadcast and streaming markets. Netflix is still the king of streaming, but Paramount will now be a credible top 5 participant, or top 4, depending on the subscriber count. They also will close the gap with Disney in the race for the top of the studio production market, so it could help make them a significant Hollywood brand or conglomerate of brands. Reportedly, the merger will see the studios remain separate standalone entities, Warner Brothers and Paramount Pictures. Each is expected to have individual creative and will produce 15 movies a year, but the streaming services will be combined. They will have quite the combination of content and brands under one umbrella. Paramount showed that they possess the right touch to create hit show after hit show. Tulsa King, Landman, and others are high-rated shows with strong followings. Now, they have HBO, which has produced many series that are generational, like The Sopranos, The Game of Thrones, and Entourage. The Netflix combination would have been obviously troubling, given the ranking of the two entities combined. As we have discussed before, it would have created a dominant streaming service, which Netflix already is by itself, and it would have potentially taken one of the leading studios out of the movie theater distribution business. Initially, I was skeptical of this alternative as well. First, I was skeptical of whether the Ellisons could pull this off because of how their initial offer seemed to be far off and somewhat missing the point. But they did a great job in understanding their stance on the value of the remaining assets was not helpful and sweetening the deal to provide value to push them over the Netflix. Also, I thought there may be challenges to the markets as well. But I think, if reports are true, keeping the studios separate and maintaining their existing production rates is more stable than I initially expected. So, the more I view the new recent deal, it seems more appealing now that it has come to fruition. From a regulatory perspective, this combination should be less troubling as there is no dominant entity. There will be concerns with the funding structure and where the money is coming from. Apparently the debt could be a concern, but I do not think it is the disaster that the far left is claiming every merger to be. The potential job loss is a concern, but those positions would be at risk if companies remained separate and still pursued cost-cutting, or if Warner folded completely or adapted artificial intelligence like some companies are doing to a great deal. Keeping both studios standalone businesses should reduce some level of job loss, and may result in growth in the future. Some of the political opposition may be a result not so much by the actual merger, but what may happen if CNN actually has to move away from fringe news coverage to actual journalism. If they have to get away from being a progressive platform to be a news organization again, then Democrats may actually have to give answers to the public. We will have to wait and see what happens, but it does appear like a better outcome with less challenges than Netflix and is providing actual value to shareholders and potentially fans. There is a risk in possible price increases. I would suggest that they hold prices steady and transfer people into product and then reevaluate pricing tiers later. But there is a great value in a better product than either option had separately, and the combined price could be a savings over purchasing each one separately. The key lesson is that persistence can pay off, and those that may be initially negatively impacted may become sparks of competition that rises when these individuals decide to venture out on their own and choose entrepreneurship. We forget that many times these hyped-up mergers do not consolidate the market in the long haul, just in the moment. The important aspect from a policy perspective is to make sure that the larger players do not have the ability to create barriers to entry, or completely write the regulatory playbook. Allow for open competition and ease of entrepreneurship. Markets consolidate at times, which is why there is that famous rule of 3. But it will be entrepreneurs and investors that will help spark competition when there is market growth or new sectors that sprout out. The importance is to help the innovators that want to fill this space from a grassroots perspective have a fighting chance. Persistence in politics can also pay off as well. President Donald Trump gave the State of the Union address, an annual requirement for the President of the United States to provide Congress with an update of the State of the United States. Now, I am not a real big fan of watching the speech, regardless of who the president is, or even watching the rebuttal. I usually prefer to read the transcripts to see the claims as well as the agenda laid out for the upcoming year. First, I will give my thoughts of the overall speech, which was the longest speech on record. Politically, I think it was a strategically genius approach. The theme was focused on celebrating America and incorporating recent current events that filled Americans with pride. Also, President Trump was effective in using the theme to create a stark contrast between those who love and celebrate America, and those who cannot set aside their political hatred for even a moment to enjoy non-political moments. Now, the substance. Naturally, the State of the Union address will always focus on the positive for the person delivering it. No president is going to stand up there and tell people what the opposition wants to hear. President Trump highlighted his efforts to restore the American economy, rebalance trade through the tariffs, end foreign wars, and bring safety to American communities that were plagued with violence. Going forward, Trump laid out plans to further efforts to fight waste, corruption, and fraud in the federal government, tasking Vice President J.D. Vance to lead the effort. Another popular approach is ending insider trading by members of Congress while working to expand opportunity through investing. Trump also made strong arguments for the SAVE Act, calling for it to be enacted, as Americans support the ideas contained in the bill. One thing that I think was notable was Trump pointing out how his opposition uses buzzwords in their attacks, but it really applies to them. He called them out for making the term affordability center on attacks. Yet, Joe Biden and congressional Democrats were the sole group responsible for the inflation and cost hikes Americans faced, and he pointed out his policies were fixing it. Overall, the first year of the second term has been extremely consequential for the overall good for Americans and our national interests. Americans support the idea of securing our border and removing the criminal entrants from our society. They support the idea of rebalancing trade and fixing our trade issues. They support reducing costs, ending lawfare, and restoring law and order. Americans support reversing the trans ideology that has harmed so many. Americans want to be able to drive the car of their choice, whether it be gas or electric. They do not want a government edict forcing their hand. Americans want to speak their mind without the government censoring them, or reserving speech for only the political elite. American citizens support the idea that job creation is finally giving them opportunities rather than diverting opportunity to lower cost and illegally entered competition. Americans like the fact that our government is focused on them, not placing the interests of the worst members in our society above the good hard-working taxpayers. In many ways, Trump has been lockstep with the people on the issues, but there have been some challenges with the approaches. The tariffs have been an issue for American importers who have made a living bringing in goods and services made overseas with cheap and sometimes questionable labor practices. They will bear the cost for the transition to an increased level of domestic production. The Supreme Court of the United States gave the opposition a fleeting victory, striking down the global tariff because of the law used to justify them. Minutes later they were reinstated under a different law, following the guidance that was also contained in the decision. An expected response, which still raises some issues. As I have noted in the past, my hope was that tariffs would be used on the greatest offenders, like China, Brazil, and Russia, and treat our allies and partners a bit kinder up front. Understandably, sometimes there needs to be an incentive for change in order to convince the side benefiting to change course, and we cannot deny the beneficial results that have come out of the campaign. Americans support free trade overall, but we cannot deny the ill effects from globalization and the reality that free trade is more of an illusion at the moment than reality. There are tariffs, protectionism in the form of market caps, competitive product bans, and emergency brakes that restrict trade. Some foolishly believe that it is a result of quality issues, but it is simply protectionism. Another issue that was a crux of the return of Trump was the crisis around illegal immigration that negatively impacted our communities, diverting massive funds away from legal taxpayers towards illegals not contributing but taking. The effort to clearly impact the federal census, which will impact the allocation of congressional leaders and federal funds. Consider the massive effort to blur the immigration status of people getting government services, driver licenses, and registering for programs. Yet these same people wanted to track vaccine status. If you were a sympathizer for illegals, would you not want the data to tout how many you supposedly helped or impacted? No, because they know they were doing wrong. A nation no longer protects the interests and security of its citizens without a secure border. An orderly system where immigrants apply for entry, are vetted for safety and economic concerns, and then are either allowed or rejected is needed. Anyone violating that process should by default be removed. That is not controversial, completely reasonable. If you enter someone's home without permission, you do not have the right to stay until it is convenient for the intruder to leave. The homeowner has the right to remove intruders from the property they paid for, pay taxes on, and not have their personal property rights impeded. If you are trespassing, then you are by default committing a criminal act and a criminal. There is no rational argument to allow for open borders and illegal immigration. That is a false argument by default, and the proponents of that position are deceiving the public. America is a nation of immigrants and supports immigration. That is why we have an immigration system for people to follow. We are also a nation of laws, and do not support people violating our laws to reap benefits they are not entitled. The issue for many is the optics, which is largely due to progressive politicians using the fringe as pawns, and idiotically having them interfere with law enforcement operations and harass those that the government employs to enforce the rules enacted. Imagine if conservatives harassed those 87,000 armed tax collectors Biden sought to take revenue to fund open border cost. The Trump plan was actually reasonable. Focus removal on the worst offenders and those illegals that associate with them. Work with states to facilitate orderly transfers. For states that are harboring criminals, use strategic force to apprehend them. The events in Minnesota were 100% on the state of Minnesota and the city of Minneapolis. Luckily, they finally realized the error of their ways. Making our cities safe should not be controversial. For too long, liberals managed crime stats to make it look like they were doing their jobs. Rather than arresting criminals, they played around with reporting or simply did not charge based on demographics. All the while, people were still victimized. Ironic that the political party that views everyone as a victim did not protect actual victims as much as they went all out for the criminal who harmed them. President Donald Trump was preparing for a strike on Iran as a means to pressure the rogue nation that is the leading sponsor of terrorism in the Middle East. Trump repositioned military assets towards the Middle East over the last couple of weeks. Despite the original missile strike that took out the renowned nuclear sites in Iran, the rogue nation restarted its efforts and was about to receive assistance from China. Now, they are without the head terrorist, as the supreme leader along with many in charge of his forces were killed by missiles launched by Israel, who assisted with this engagement. Iran responded with some missiles fired into their neighbors, but have only alienated themselves in the region. Now, the opportunity for change presents itself. President Trump made a fair offer for those in the Iran military to walk away and be spared, or continue and be executed. Hopefully, they heed the collective warning, as they no longer have air defense and their supposed allies have no interest in helping them, as they are engulfed by their own problems at the moment. Americans do not want war. Primarily, we do not want to be involved in a conflict in the Middle East again. But there is a chance that there is not an escalation. Iran is throwing a tantrum and attacking their neighbors, who are turning on them, not America or Israel, as they hoped. There are questions some had about whether the earlier strike was as effective as we were led to believe. You have to be a complete fool to think Iran was not going to rebuild. It was a major blow to them, but clearly they rebuilt, which probably was their focus. The question again is whether it is worth it to try again given their collapsed economy. The opposition will parrot the same narratives, which clearly makes them look uninformed. They were on the wrong side of the issue when Democrats funded the Iran nuclear efforts with the deal. They gave them $400 billion and complete cover. Wonder how much more through their NGOs. This is a delicate issue as we do not want war, but it looks like a limited campaign to reduce Iran's capabilities. A needed issue to address in some manner, especially when there were reports that they were trying to obtain weapons to reach our shores. The Iranian government is crippled but still in power. The people will have to decide their fate, but with what ammunition do they have at their disposal? Signs and social media do little against the Iranian government's arsenal. Even it is simply rifles and handguns. The positives we can take out of this is that Iran finally experienced some justice for the evil they have committed for decades. They have killed tens of thousands of people and have faced little consequences for their actions. And Democrats even rewarded them. That is unacceptable. I enjoy listening to the Philly sports media. Like sports markets in the Northeast, the performance and direction of our sports teams matter to the die-hard and casual fans alike. In Philly, we are simply more passionate about our teams, stars, and overall rosters than many other sports markets. Philly is a blue-collar city that works hard, and they expect to see effort every night from the athletes that don our jerseys. But sometimes the media companies that entertain and somewhat educate the fan base do a disservice to the overall experience, as they seem to amplify issues that are not completely accurate or helpful to our overall interests. Sure, the media is not supposed to be a lapdog for those considered influential public figures. But I do not believe they should be attempting to frame how the market views issues simply by repetitive broadcasts of narratives based on personal leanings of their staff. Some networks are simply echo chambers of the same positions throughout the day. WIP has passionate hosts, but they tend to be an echo chamber and sounding board to fuel distraction and malcontent within our teams. The coach, front office, or players may put the truth out there, but it does not stop some from simply repeating the same messaging. They seem to hope to be right, when if they are right then everything and everyone will face outcomes that are simply wrong. As one Philly fan said, the Eagles do not have an A.J. Brown problem, they have a WIP problem, which is a popular radio station in Philly. The narrative that continues to be sold is that the Philadelphia Eagles are going to trade our star wide receiver. The national media hope so because many are fans of New York teams. So what do they care if they spread narratives about a rival city? But the local media should be above that, but they are not, especially when they want someone gone. My Philadelphia Eagles are better with Brown on our team, and we are better with Nick Sirianni as our head coach. The results show that, and those facts are undisputed. But, like any smart operation, they are willing to hear out offers and see what the market is for players. And apparently, they are making it clear that they have no real intention of making a trade unless a team meets an unreasonably high demand. But there will still be some voices that will continue this narrative, despite everyone in the real know continuing to say that they have no real interest in making a trade. Maybe the sports press is trying to speak into fruition and elevate the fringe sect that wants the trade, even though the mainstream of the base does not support a trade of a key star player. And we wonder why people do not trust the media.
The Democrats continue to tarnish their brand. They continue to align themselves with the worst in our society and against the American people. The brilliance of President Trump to make it clear as day to who supports Americans and who is against them. Democrats would not even set aside their political hatred for one moment. Democrats are not for unity, law and order, and our American way. They simply operate for their own interests and power. They embody so many Soviet principles and economic values that they are not aligned with our American mainstream. They are sympathetic with those who do evil, never failing to try to normalize bad. It is one thing to oppose war or highlight concerns for what may result, like Rand Paul did. It is a completely another thing to perpetuate blatant lies and narratives like Tim Kaine. Democrats are disconnected with the American people and our mainstream views, needs, and wants. They do not care. Time and time again the Democratic Party demonstrates they are unable to get things done that actually benefit the broadest set of Americans. Especially for taxpayers, entrepreneurs, and those who make our society. A vote for them is a waste and a sign of mental illness. And no, we should not trade our star wide receiver. There is a clear need for teams to have two options, and we have two productive stars. We just need an offense that can find opportunities for all and sustain drives consistently. This is not a situation where there is addition by subtraction. We have the tools. We just need a better play caller to make them all work. We hopefully have that for a few years in Mannion. Thank you for experiencing this episode of the Christopher Peter Review. Your viewership is appreciated and valued. Please follow the Christopher Peter Review on social media and continue to visit www.crcreview.com for new episodes. Thank you once again. Until next time.